because there's this long trend now, and we've seen it in Cuba for a while. Before that, the most prominent example was Venezuela. You had Hollywood starlets, you had Bernie Sanders. I think it was even Bernie Sanders that was talking about the American dream is more real in Venezuela than it is in America. Right? That's how they were talking about Venezuela early on within the Hugo Chavez regime. And what ended up happening? Well, Hugo Chavez didn't initially run as a full-blown socialist, but he governed that way, to the point where he was actually going around and in many cases abolishing the private ownership of the means of production and distribution, which again, when we're talking about socialism, whether you want to call it revolutionary socialism, democratic socialism, whatever you want to call it, the key feature of socialism is the abolition of the private ownership of the means of production. Hugo Chavez was attempting to implement that. There's a video of Hugo Chavez walking down the street as one of his aides is telling him which businesses are what on the street, and you see Hugo Chavez going, expropriate, 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 which basically means government, take it over. And the idea was to give to the people. Okay, so what happened? Well, he started to implement these socialist policies, everything from education, healthcare, central planning of the economy, government takeover of major industries. He started doing all of that. Well, when oil prices were high, that wasn't hurting them so bad. He had more money to give out. The problem is that he was destroying entrepreneurship within Venezuela. You didn't want to invest in Venezuela because you didn't know if the government was just going to come in and take it. You didn't want you couldn't build your business up to a certain degree because the government would come in and take it. So what happened? Well, people with the knowledge and the know-how left the country. They went somewhere else. Other people who are highly productive decided to not be as productive because what's the point? So step one was implement the socialist policies. And initially, yeah, a lot of people were glad when they were taking money from some people and handing it out to others. But once you destroyed the entrepreneurial spirit, once you made it very, very difficult to be able to effectively run a business and provide people with products and services that they wanted, well then the results were you made everyone poorer. So yes, if that's your method for addressing inequity is to make everyone poorer, that's actually fairly simple to do. The problem is what we find out is people don't like that. And so some of the same people that may have voted for Hugo Chavez 10 years earlier were the same people in the streets protesting against Hugo Chavez when the economic policies didn't achieve the results that were promised. Well, what happened at that point? Did the socialist government decide, you know what, gosh, maybe we're wrong. Maybe this isn't the best way to achieve greater opportunity, wealth, and prosperity in society? No, they didn't come to that conclusion. They doubled down on all of their economic policies, and as a result, they created more people protesting their policies. And at that point, there's a critical point each one of these socialist government meets when they're going to have to make one of two decisions. Either they're going to be in a position where the people can take control back and remove the socialist policies that have banished them to poverty, or the government not only doubles down on its economic policy, but it starts to suspend human rights and engage in political oppression. They start to engage in coercion and violence in order to achieve their objectives. And what you see from the left in this country is that the moment a socialist regime does that, they give these token responses where they're saying, well, yeah, no, we don't like that. We're democratic socialists. Okay, well, great. Show me where socialism gets implemented. And you don't get to come back 15, 20 years later and say that's not real socialism. When you're sitting there praising it, saying it's the real deal, or holding it up as people like Nikole Hannah-Jones did, saying that this is the best country for addressing inequality. And then you see the political oppression, and you give a little token response, but then you find a way to blame the United States. It's all the United States' fault. I get to start asking you questions about, well, wait a second. If you actually get the economic policies that you want here in the United States and it doesn't achieve the desired results, or people start to rebel against it, what is your response going to be? Is it going to be to come back and say maybe we were wrong? Or is it going to be to crack down? Because what we saw with Hugo Chavez, what we see with the regime in Cuba, is they start to otherize anybody, any person that protests their power, because they see themselves as the only legitimate representatives of the people's revolution. And it doesn't matter that the revolution took place decades ago. Revolution is an ongoing process for them. They have to keep people in this constant mindset of war and revolution. So that way, even when a majority of their population doesn't like what they're doing anymore, the government has the ability and what they believe is the moral authority to then otherize those people and say, no, 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 you're not the real people, because they're the representatives of the people and the people's revolution. And so if they've got to crack down on your rights or liberties or freedoms, well, so be it. You're going to tell me that hasn't been what we've witnessed, whether it was the former USSR, whether it was Venezuela, whether it was Cuba, whether it was China? I mean, are you going to tell me that's not what happened? You're going to tell me the socialist government didn't come in and not start cracking down on anybody that opposed their economic policies? But there is a long history within the left in this country. And there was a reporter named Durant who went over to the Soviet Union at a time when Stalin was engaging in massive oppression of his people, to the point where millions of people were starving in the Ukraine. And what does he come back and tell everyone? I have seen the future and it works. Malcolm Muggeridge was one of the only reporters that went over there and actually had the courage to come back and say Stalin is a monster. And he was mocked by the left-wing press for it. But then after everything comes out and we realize the purges and the fact that Muggeridge was right, well, then it's like, well, okay, that wasn't real socialism. And you're seeing the same thing here with Cuba, where just last year, they're praising it as a way to address healthcare, as a way to address literacy, as a way to address education, as a way to address inequity within society, and to achieve greater fairness. And then when you start to see the people rise up against their government because they don't like those policies, because the people living under that regime don't see it as a beacon of hope or equality or freedom or prosperity, the left totally turns a blind eye to them or tries to make the protest about something that it is clearly not. And that is what I find actually scary about this entire exercise.